Good evening, everyone. My name is Judy Ziss. I'm Chair of the Legislative Committee of the League of Women Voters of Falmouth. And on behalf of the Falmouth League, I welcome all of you to our program this evening. We thank FCTV for being our partner in making this program as a broadcast possible. For later listening, check the FCTV website for rebroadcast times and also for links to streaming if someone would like to watch the program on a computer or other device. Now, as for the League of Women Voters, I think most of you have heard this, but it is important to repeat. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We are nonpartisan because we never support a party or a candidate. We are political because we take stands on public policy issues, but only after study, discussion, and reaching a group consensus. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government. It works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and it influences public policy through education and through advocacy. And that is exactly what we're doing here this evening. Our purpose is to encourage informed debate on issues concerning elections and voting here in Massachusetts. Tonight's program is entitled Looking Under the Hood, COVID-19 Election and Lessons Learned. It is in three parts. First, our Falmouth Town Clerk, Michael Palmer, will take us under the hood, behind the scenes in the election, to explain and describe how our 2020 election was conducted and protected under the special COVID-19 rules that we had. Second, the three members of our state legislative delegation will join Mr. Palmer to discuss the lessons learned from 2020 so that those lessons can help the legislature in crafting voting legislation going forward. Third, we will pose questions to our panel from you, our viewers, if you submit them. We invite you to submit questions during this broadcast, and you can do it through the Falmouth League of Women Voters email site. Send them to Falmouth LVW, that's League of Women Voters, Falmouth LVW@gmail.com. And we will use as many as we get if we can. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce, I'm going to say our three state legislators, but I believe that David Vieira is sort of hung up in traffic and rain coming in from Boston. So I will introduce two of our state legislators who are here with hopes that David Vieira will be able to be joining us. First, I'd like to welcome State Senator Susan Moran.
Thank you so much, Judy. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the League putting this forum together, and you are right. Representative Vieira is on the road coming back from the State House and hopes to be able to join us later.
Thank you very much, Sue. And now Dylan, Representative Dylan Fernandes.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks for putting this program together. It's always one of the best events of the year to talk to the League and have such a good discussion around civics and voting rights. So appreciate it. Looking forward to the event.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dylan. I appreciate your comments, Sue, and also Dylan's. And now we go on to the second part, the first part of the program. I'm going to invite Sue and Dylan and David when he gets here to listen to our Town Clerk, Michael Palmer. And he's going to give us a presentation on 2020 voting here in.
It looks like Judy froze up on me here, so I'm just going to go and if she needs to interrupt me, please go ahead, Judy. But I'll just continue on with my portion of what I'm doing here. So Judy, I think you got froze up, but I was just starting to continue. But go ahead if you'd like to.
Okay, I have just a little bit more. I want to say some nice things about you first.
Oh, wow. Go ahead, take all the time you need.
Okay. He lived to tell about it, all of those elections. And I think at that point, he probably would say he barely lived to tell about it, but it looks like he's very much alive here now. So that's good. If we were in an in-person event, I would suggest a standing ovation for Michael and for his team, the volunteers, and all of the other employees at the office. I think we can do this here. So you're going to have to imagine that, but all of you deserve our vote of thanks because it was quite an amazing year. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Falmouth Town Clerk Michael Palmer.
Well, thanks, Judy, and thank the league for that. And it certainly was a team effort that we went through last year, and it was a very eventful year. We were all very busy, but my staff in this office and some election workers came together and we pulled it all off, not really knowing what to expect. I really was amazed, and I enjoy what I do, so I could complain about it, but I maybe complained during, but now that I'm looking back on it, we pulled off some pretty amazing stuff last year with turnouts and so forth. But it was a team effort, so I appreciate you acknowledging that, and thanks for the league for putting this on and letting me explain kind of what we went through. So I'll with all that, I'll get going. So not too many years ago, elections were just a one-day event. You went to your polling place, you checked in, you got a ballot, you checked out, you cast your ballot into a tabulator, and then at the end of the night, we maybe were throwing a few absentee ballots there, but at the end of the night, we had some results to give out. But with all the changes to the election laws in the recent years, this has really turned into almost a month-long event for each election, and the changes have had impacts, and so I don't want to be complaining about how long this takes, although that does take an absorbent amount of time. It has had an impact on voter turnout, which ultimately should be all our goals, I guess, to have more participation in the election process and being involved. So that is definitely a positive outcome of all the changes that take place for allowing early voting during a pandemic where many people could have just said forget it, but they took advantage of the options. So really early voting started with the presidential election in 2006, and early voting in person, I should say, was introduced in the presidential election 2006. And in that year, approximately 7,000 voters took advantage of it. To accomplish this, what we needed to do was we had to staff and set up a polling place for a 2-week period of time here at Town Hall. We did that in the old water department, and it was basically open, and we were open on weekends, but we were basically open the hours that Town Hall was open. And they go to the water department, and voters were checked in using poll pads for the first time. At this point in 2016, they were only authorized to be used for early voting in person. They hadn't been certified to be used at elections yet. So, well, let me explain what a poll pad is. A poll pad is basically an iPad with a searchable voter database loaded onto it. What this allows us to use one poll pad to check in and one check-in table at early voting. A poll worker could manually enter a person's name, or they could use the camera function of the poll pad and scan someone's driver's license in order to check them in. Now, I do want to point out that driver's license aren't a requirement and are not required to vote. They only make the check-in process more efficient. So I always want to make that statement for everybody, just so they know that it doesn't deter anybody, and so people feel that could be a deterrent. So I always make that statement. So once people were checked in, they were given a ballot, and another change that took place here is that voters did not deposit their ballots directly into a tabulator. They were given an early voting envelope, and they needed to seal their ballot in the envelope, and then those were held in the clerk's office until election day, and then an election worker would put them through the tabulator. Some voters had some issue with that. They wanted to go, they voted in person like they were going to the polling place on election day and put the ballot right into the tabulator. But in order for this to work and voting early, and you don't want election results to be leaked out or any results to be tabulated before election day, it really could change the outcome of an election if people knew what the results were, or deter people from voting if they saw that somebody was so far ahead or so far behind. So the law requires that these results, and we signed an affidavit stating we would not leak any of these results out prior to election day. But that was one of the drawbacks from it. People did want to deposit it right into a tabulator. So unless I had 9 tabulators set up for each one of our precincts, that wasn't going to be possible. So they deposited into an envelope. These envelopes were returned to the clerk's office, and then we had to enter them into our state computer system. The reason for doing this is so that we could produce a voting list to be used on election day that would show that somebody has already voted early, and that person would not be allowed to vote a second time in person. So we're taking those envelopes, we're scanning them into our state computer system, and then on the voting lists that were actually printed out at that time, this is pre-poll pads being used to check people in, that information was already pre-tabulated on or pre-populated onto those voting tablets. So all these envelopes that we had stored until election day, we had a central tabulation center, which again, on election day needed to be staffed and set up. All these envelopes needed to be checked off an early voting list. The envelopes needed to be open. The ballots need to be extracted and separated from the envelopes. Any write-in votes need to be hand counted, and then the ballots need to be processed through a tabulator. So there's quite a few steps there, and we had you know, a whole nother precinct basically of people working here at Town Hall to accomplish this. It was quite a feat, the tabulators had to be set up to accept one precinct at a time. So we just went through each precinct. We did 1, then we did 2, and then 3, and so forth, all the way to 9. And we really had no idea, or I had no idea, how long this process would take prior to this being happening. And that first election, which is very unusual given the technology that we have now. We're not hand counting ballots, we're not paper ballots. We're putting through tabulator and we're uploading that information. We were there until after midnight before we had any results. That first election, we did that, and I just didn't really have a clue of how long it was going to take or what was involved in it. Obviously, we do now, so now we can move forward and take that knowledge and plan it accordingly. But when things happen so fast and laws change so quickly, like in July of this year, they passed new regulations for the primary and for the December election. There were things that helped turnout again, but certainly there were some unintended consequences of it. So I'm going to jump ahead actually until last year and kind of explain what our process was there. We had 6 different elections. Congratulations, Sue. You accounted for a couple of those elections, I think. So Sue Moran was elected our state senator, replacing Vinnie DiMacedo. So that was added 2 additional elections during that last year. And also we were operating these during a pandemic. So that actually brought additional challenges into all running an election. So and that being said, because it was in a pandemic, it definitely brought challenges to voting early and voting on election day. We had to set up polling places, not only allowing 6 people in at a time. We had plexiglass up to protect the poll workers, and everyone needed to wear masks and use all the precautions that in place. So there was a lot to just setting up an election prior to the actual day or prior to the early voting taking place. So, but the most dramatic change last year was the expansion of early voting by mail. For the December presidential election, we had 15,000 people voted early. That's 56% of all the registered voters in town, and it was actually 2/3 of the voters that voted early. So it was a tremendous number of people that took advantage of early voting by mail. And for the presidential, we always get a high turnout, so quite a few people voted early in person also. So we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of people who show up on election day. But so really the processing of all the early voting by mail ballots and the early voting in person were the same procedures we used as in 2016. All the same steps. They needed to put the ballots into an envelope. We need to store them. They need to be entered into the computer and so forth. But early voting by mail, I'm going to say, is very similar. What people are used to is absentee voting. The difference is absentee voting required that a voter meet one of 3 conditions, and that was you're not going to be on town on election day, you have a disability that prevents you from voting on election day, or you have a religious belief that prevents you from voting on election day. So early voting in person and by mail eliminated those conditions. So anybody that wanted to, not having any reason, they just choose to use another method of voting, was able to. And I think this opened up a lot of avenues or options for people to vote. So, but both absentee balloting and early voting by mail required that an application be submitted first in order to receive a ballot. In last fall's election, the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office mailed an application to every voter. This can be a very costly proposition to do. I'm not sure if we'll see this mailing of applications continue in the future. I don't know what the legislation has. I think this some that's coming up, and the legislators would know more about that. But there's definitely a cost involved with that, and how many people didn't use them, and you mail them and they just get tossed into the trash. But so I'm not sure where that'll go. We will not be mailing, I should say, an application for our annual town election in May. We will have early voting by mail available for the May election, but you'll need to submit an application, either download from our website or pick up an application here at town hall in order to have a ballot mailed to you. So I hope people won't be waiting for that application to come. It's very costly, especially if the town's trying to do it on their own. So that application, after it was mailed out by the Secretary's office, it needed to be returned to our office. It needed to again be entered into our computer system. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly because it's just the steps in this takes, and just to show you the added steps that were added because of early voting. So it needed to be entered into the state computer system. Labels needed to be printed and attached to 3 different envelopes. The return envelope, instructions, and a ballot was stuffed into an outer envelope. Postage was attached. We had to deliver these to the post office because with 15,000 ballots being mailed out, we had trays and trays and trays of these. So Barbara, our receptionist at Town Hall, was great with handling the mail and helping us get that over there. And sometimes we need to use 2 vehicles just to bring it over to the post office, but it was quite a chore. So the voter would receive the ballot, they would vote their ballot, and they would seal it back in the envelope, and then return the envelope in an outer envelope that was provided with postage paid by the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. So again, a very costly proposition there. The ballot could be returned either by mail or could be dropped off at a drop box here outside of Town Hall. We purchased it's a gray looking box that sits out in front here. It looks similar to a U.S. mailbox, but it's gray. It does have the seal of the town of Falmouth to distinguish it from the U.S. Postal Service box. But that's available now for people to use for all types of mail, but hopefully you utilize that as mail-in ballots as we continue to use them moving forward. So we received those ballots back at the clerk's office. The ballot envelope needs to remove from the mailing envelope. They have to verify that the voter has signed the envelope, and we're recording this in the state computer system, and then we store them by precinct until opening and deposited in the tabulator. At this point, we're using the same procedures I described a few minutes ago to process the ballot, so I won't cover that again. But with the exception of a couple of changes that helped us dramatically here from some of the fewer first elections that we used early voting for. The first change was the certification of a high-speed tabulator. They were only available to a few cities and towns in the state. And after the 2016 presidential, where I realized we were there till after midnight, I worked with the vendor that was going to be providing those. And I said, we have to do something. I can't be here till after midnight stuffing these ballots through the tabulator. And I was put on a list to when these did get certified by the Secretary's office and became available, that I would be in line to get one. And we were fortunate enough for the presidential and the state primary to actually have this high-speed tabulator available to the town of Falmouth. I think there were 6 towns in the state that had these, and I kept it very quiet because I didn't want to. The people were still processing them through the tabulators they use at the precincts, which are very slow to process. So So the processing time changed from a ballot every 10 seconds to 100 a minute. So with 15,000 ballots to process, that was just a huge improvement, and hopefully they'll move forward with having these available for the rest of the towns in future elections, because it's a really time saving piece of equipment. So the second change that was happening, that we could process these ballots prior to election day. So we were able to designate days that we were going to be opening ballots, removing the ballots from the envelopes, and then processing through this high-speed tabulator. So again, the same process we use. We check it off an early voting list, remove it from the envelope, separate the ballot from the envelope, and put it through the tabulator. So that helped tremendously. It didn't put a lot of pressure on election day trying to get 15,000 ballots through the tabulator. Although with the high-speed tabulator, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But it was, and that's not with some controversy. But again, you don't want results to be leaked out prior to election day, and now we have them already through a tabulator. You hope that the integrity of town clerks across the state, and I believe there is integrity there, they wouldn't be leaking any of these results prior to the election. So we did see also some changes with voting in person on election day and early voting in person. Obviously, during the pandemic, everyone needed to wear masks, and we only allowed 6 people at a time. We had the plexiglass in place for election workers. But the election law changed to allow us to use the poll pads to be used at the polling locations at each precinct. So the voting file that was loaded into them contained information if a voter had already voted early, so they would obviously not be allowed to vote in person if they already voted early. So some people wanted to push that window and see, well, I'll go and vote early, and I'll go to the polls and see if I can vote early. Well, we had that cross check available, so we weren't allowing that to happen. So the second thing that really the advantage of the poll pads is, well, all the information on the poll pads contained the entire voting list for the town. So if a voter arrived at the wrong precinct, we were able to send them to the correct precinct, eliminating some of their confusion for the voters, and possibly in the past that they may not have voted because they didn't know where to go, and they had to call town hall to find out where their precinct was, or and they may have just walked out and forgot about it. But with the availability of the poll pads to be able to tell them where they needed to go, because again, in a presidential, we get the turnout to 80%. Other elections we're down to 30%. A lot of people don't vote except for presidential, and they're just not sure where they're going. So this will help to eliminate some confusion, having that database available on the poll pads at each one. Another change for voting in person, we eliminated the checkout table. And what this did is, at the end of the night, the number of voters that were checked in on the poll pads needed to match the number of ballots that were put through the tabulator. This eliminated the poll workers, after having worked a 17-hour day, from manually adding up the voters on the check-in books and then manually adding up the voters on the checkout books and then matching that to the tabulator and hoping it all came out correctly. There's just too many places for human error to take place there. So, and I just didn't see the need for it. So I think this is a more efficient system to be able to handle that. And I think the poll pads have some possibility for expanded uses moving forward, possibly for same-day registration and stuff, which I know is probably going to be discussed in the near future here in Massachusetts. So early voting definitely has shown that it has a positive impact on turnout. The introduction of the poll pads and the high-speed terminators have helped. High-speed terminators have definitely helped us. But there's also other opportunities for improvement. The state computer system that we use is over 20 years old and sometimes very antiquated in how we enter the information and how we have to do it. The addition of a mail merge function to the state computer system will allow us to put envelopes through a printer and just do a mail merge rather than making 3 sets of labels and putting the labels onto each of the envelopes. That would be a great time saver. Also, the ability of a scanner that could read barcodes, so we could just feed the envelopes through a barcode, and they could pick up the barcode on each of the envelopes and enter that into the state computer system would be helpful. Right now, we use a handheld one. We have to scan the barcode on the outside of an envelope, put the scanner down, and then do keystrokes onto our computer in order to enter the information. It just seems to me that we have a computer ability to speed this up a little bit. So, so that would definitely be helpful. So, something to look into. But as I said at the beginning, elections used to be a one-day event, and now it's early voting has really turned this elections into a month-long process. The changes in the past year happened so quickly. It really placed a burden to administer fair and accurate elections on the town clerks of the offices across the state. And, you know, we tend to be a group of people that like to complain about things. So I try to take the positive spin on all this, and we did get it done. Somehow we got it done, and we did get it done. But now that we know what we're doing, let's plan for the future. And how can we not get into working 7 days a week, you know, 15-hour days, overtime for my staff, and they didn't complain once. My staff was, again, I will say that the staff here in the clerk's office and a group of election workers really came through in the pinch and helped me out. But I'm just hoping that any future changes to election law, and these happen so quickly, we're in the pandemic and we're adding, but any changes in the future, we could plan to make some improvements to how town clerks administer elections. So that's basically what I had, and I certainly would welcome questions or move forward, Judy. So I'll leave that up to you, how we want to move forward.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. We're going to have possibly a question and answer session later, depending on whether we get questions. Otherwise, we'll do things in a little different way. But that's exactly what we wanted. So thank you so much. I think that everybody found that very interesting. And, you know, there are things like the poll books and some of these other things that we hear about and don't quite know what they are. So I found that very interesting. I hope the audience did. And now we will try to go on to part 2, although I don't think David Vieira has made an appearance yet. Am I correct?
You are correct, Judy.
Okay, so let's do this. I will introduce it, and then, you know, you and Dylan can discuss things until he comes in. And if he comes in, you know, hopefully that will be helpful too. So anyway, we're going to move on to the second part of our program. We're going to focus on the lessons learned from 2020. And I think now we have a feel for a lot of the, you know, the things that we should be thinking about going ahead. So far, the Massachusetts legislature, as I understand it, has generally continued these rules through our spring town election. But I believe that in terms of early in-person voting, that will be up to the town. So you can correct me later if that's true. But that was my impression, but I could be wrong. But I understand that generally rules have been extended through the time of our election. Maybe is
Let me answer that.
Excuse me?
I believe legislation has been extended through June 30th of this year, extending early voting in person at least, and early voting by mail at least. Early voting in person may be an option, a town option to incorporate. My feeling is that for a local election, a municipal election, it's going to mirror closer to what we did in the state primary last September, where we only had roughly 475 people come and vote over the course of a week. And I didn't really feel that was cost effective to set up a whole polling place. People, if they want to vote in person, can come on election day. If they want to vote early, the option to vote early by mail is there. So that's my feel on it. But the Board of Selectmen would ultimately take a vote to whether to do that. I would recommend that we don't do that. It just didn't seem to be cost effective to do that.
And that was my impression, that it looks like it's going to be up to us locally what to do, because it is just a local election. I shouldn't say just a local election, they're very important, but obviously the turnout of local elections is not the same as a turnout for the governor or certainly for the president. When we announced this program and we asked for questions, Don Mallinson of East Falmouth sent in a question. And since it's so directly on point, I thought I would just read it. Will Massachusetts continue to do all that it can to encourage all citizens to vote, even when there is no pandemic? Some other states are backtracking from pandemic measures to pre-pandemic restrictions on voting. And really answering that question is the crux of tonight's program. That's what we had in mind as we were planning the program. And so now we're going to turn to that. Now, Senator Moran, just as our town clerk had all of these elections, she ran in 4 races, 3 of which were contested, 1 contested primary and 2 contested general elections. So I thought I would ask her to start off. And the issue that really I think the voters are most interested in is whether we're going to continue mail-in early voting. That's something they really liked. So I thought if you and Dylan could start talking about that, maybe we'll have all 3 of you shortly. And so if you would start off, Sue, and then Dylan jump in, and we'll have a discussion of that, and plus go on to some of other issues that will be that were from these new provisions. So
absolutely happy to, and looking forward to speaking with my colleague Rep Fernandes. But I will agree, I know how to pick them, right? I started running right before the pandemic and then became the test case along with very few other elections going on in the state. I believe it was only 1 other at the same time. And the most important thing, I think really it's twofold, and I appreciate Don's question. The first thing is, it was an opportunity, and you really, you're amplifying it tonight, to get a real civic education on what the clerks in our towns do. When you look at the responsibility, the experience, the attention to detail, and the practicality of thinking ahead, all of the implementation. And it happened sort of like an avalanche in terms of when you look at Michael Palmer's view, because it is a pandemic. There are considerations of health advice, and that was not clear at the beginning. It was sort of slow coming. I remember when the discussion about plexiglass started to make sense. And if I had, a couple of discussions with the, I know Mike Palmer had written to Dave Vieira and other folks about, things, since he is knowledgeable and knew what this would mean. He was sort of ringing the alarm bell to say, legislators, you really have to pay attention to implementation issues. There were many early in person, way more than usual. We were all part sort of an experiment, and to fast forward ahead, I think that the majority of folks who experienced it in Massachusetts want to see most of the elements continue going forward. And right now, we've just extended the COVID voting rules that Michael was just discussing until through this next election. But I would anticipate more to come, and keep the things that are working well. Speak to the clerks about more important things to change or consider, and really look at, for example, one of the things that I'm sponsoring is an act on early voting cost reimbursements. And the clerk, Michael Palmer, and I were just talking about, he asked me, does it really include an estimate of cost? Because that would make sense. And the legislation that I'm supporting, it's House 449, Senate 1378, and it does defray the cost to city and towns of early voting, including hiring staff, overtime, voting booths, privacy screens that we were just talking about. And it allows the clerks, as was sort of, I guess, Michael's intuition or common sense, based upon estimates, it's supposed to come through 30 days before. And these will be discussed further, but that's where it looks right now. Dylan, I don't know if you have a better view of that.
Yeah, well, that was a really great description, Sue. And look, I mean, I think all of this reform comes at a time where nationally our democracy has never been more and more threatened. Our democracy has literally been under attack in the past year, 6 months. We had a violent insurrection at the state capitol trying to overturn the results of a free and fair election. And even after that insurrection, the majority of Republicans in Congress voted to overturn a free and fair election. Had that happened, I mean, democracy literally would have ended in our country. So, you know, it is incumbent upon all of us as citizens to ensure that we are giving people access to vote and protecting their right to vote. During a pandemic, you know, we extended that in a lot of ways. And during a pandemic, right, a time when we've all been sheltered in our homes, a time when, you know, we barely see anyone, we barely get out, we had record turnout in Massachusetts. I mean, think about that. That just shows how incredibly powerful these policies are and how incredibly effective they are at getting people to vote, especially people who are most vulnerable and don't have the types of access that a lot of people do. Working people, people of color, people from lower income statuses, people who face traditional barriers to vote. We've shown that through mail-in voting, through extended early voting, that we've really removed a lot of those barriers and expanded access to democracy in the state. And I think that's something that we should all be really proud about, one. And then two, it's something we absolutely should be a baseline for going forward, right? Like us continuing what we've done during this pandemic to expand voting access is a baseline moving forward. And I think there's a lot of support in the legislature right now, both in the House and Senate, to extend that this session. And then we also need to build upon it with bills like Sue's. I have a couple bills of my own around voting, and there's a lot of other ideas. But I think what we've done during the pandemic is the floor, and we have even more reforms that we can push for to improve it. And with all of that, you know, we need to be incredibly mindful of how this impacts our local communities and our local clerk's office in particular. Like, we are so lucky. Falmouth is so fortunate to have Michael Palmer and his team, who are just like all-stars, you know, just incredible people who uphold our democracy. But, you know, there are other communities that aren't as well equipped, I'll just say. And so even Michael, with, you know, as incredible as he is, you know, needs that extra financial support and added support from the state. So I do think we need to do a better job of, yes, continuing to do what we've done during the pandemic, build upon it, and then also make sure that Michael and town clerks across the state have the resources that they need to make it happen.
Sounds like both of you at least would like to continue early in-person voting. I mean, early mail-in voting, and except for the possibility of the low turnout elections like the, you know, our local elections, and continue early in-person voting. Am I correct in getting that sense?
That's well said.
Okay, let's see. What about, these things seem more technical, but yet I think they're important, and there are things that Michael Palmer did mention. What about flexibility? I don't think he talked about this. Flexibility in choosing poll workers, and maybe all three of you might want to talk about that. I mean, I think one of the issues is that there had been a lot of specific rules about poll workers, and the decision was made that it was going to be difficult enough to get poll workers under the circumstances of the pandemic without following all of those rules. So maybe all three of you would like to, talk a little bit about that.
I would just really rely on the clerk. Michael Palmer, I think, would be the expert. And so I'd like to hear him first, if that's okay with you, Judy.
Sure.
So there are rules in place to how we appoint election workers, and you're supposed to have equal representation of the two major political parties that are represented throughout in the town. What that does, though, is that as time has changed, you find that many more voters are unenrolled, and they're not enrolled in a party. So that really dwindles the pool of potential election workers. So there's a process that they go through where they're asked for recommendations from the town committees in the town for election workers, and this is done on a yearly basis. And they're supposed to submit a list, and if they don't submit a list, then it allows the town clerk to appoint election workers to the best of his ability to fill that requirement at an equal representation. But what we find is that there are a vast number of election workers that are unenrolled, and I have no qualms about the election workers that I have. Occasionally you'll have people that tend to make it a partisan process, but I have to speak to those people, and those people, 99.9% of the poll workers I have, I am very comfortable with them that they'll fulfill their duties in an impartial manner. So I'm very comfortable with the way we've been filling these positions, and I'm going to tell you, it's not 100% split down party lines. I just don't see how it could be. So and I think that's part of legislation that's coming up that's going to remove that requirement that we even attempt to do that. So.
Yeah, that's a great point by Michael. I'll build on that. So Falmouth is by far the largest town I represent, like more than double the population of the next biggest town that I represent. And I have 9 communities in my district. And when thinking about any of these changes, it's really important to think about the geographical size and barriers that come with the communities that is impacted. A lot of legislation that comes from Beacon Hill is very kind of city focused, and it's really kind of my job, Sue's job. We work together on this to make sure that the little towns are thought about as well. And so while Falmouth is like a blazing metropolis compared to some communities in my district, I have Gosnold, right? There's about 6 people there right now, right? So how do you hit these requirements with these tiny towns? Or Aquina on the Vineyard, tiny town, less than 1,000 people. So they're, while Falmouth is constrained, it's nowhere near what these other town clerks are facing with such a tiny population. So that needs to be taken into consideration. One piece that, speaking about little towns, Smitty Pignatelli, who is from the Berkshires, represents 20 plus tiny towns out in Western Mass. He and I teamed up during the passage of the mail-in voting legislation to make sure that we got an amendment through, because originally they were going to send the mail-in ballots to everyone's home address. Well, on Martha's Vineyard, a lot of people don't even have home addresses, and they're on like a dirt road, down who knows where. They haven't gotten mail in there, at their house ever, right? And so we put a change in there to make sure that the mail was going to be sent to people's PO boxes. And so just that's a really small change. But if me and Smitty hadn't gotten that through, a lot of people in our own district wouldn't have been able to get their ballots. So
I would not have gotten my ballot.
And so that's an instance of just when we get these policies, we got to think about our communities that are on the farthest reaches of our state, like our communities that we're a part of on the Cape and Islands.
One thing that hits me here, and I know Michael's touched on it briefly. You did have these sessions where you were opening ballots. You were opening ballots early. And I think there were notices in the newspaper that people could come and watch. How did that work out? Did you have observers coming in for any of those sessions?
We had 2 people come in the 5 days that we did it, and basically I explained the process of what we were doing, allowed them to observe what we were doing, and I've known the 2 people that come in for quite a few years, and they left after a half hour and said, I think you have that under control, and there was really nothing to see there. And again, I'm 100% transparent, and my integrity is at stake when this thing's come into, and I place a high priority on my integrity. So I wouldn't do anything to jeopardize an election, and I felt that they felt the same way. They saw what we were doing, they understood what we were doing, and they allowed us to do it.
Thank you. Let's see, no checkout desk. You mentioned that, and you said that really it causes problems in terms of trying to do bookkeeping at the end. And I suspect it worked out fine without it, but that's one thing you might want to talk about, is whether you need to continue what we used to do, where you come in and give your address and get your ballot, and then take your ballot and give your address again and put it in the machine. And this was eliminating giving your address a second time.
I'm not sure anybody even noticed that we eliminated it, to be quite honest with you. But what had happened is, if somebody was incorrectly checked in, and then somebody was incorrectly checked out, when you went to balance at the end of the night, which one did you correct? You couldn't correct either of them, because if you say, well, I put that person down by mistake, but he really did, you're compounding the problem. So it really, with the poll pads, it's just so efficient checking people in, to have that double check with an outbook and an inbook and cross-checking it. There was too many places for human error to take place. And again, after these election workers working 17-hour days, that's what was happening. It just got to the point where it was just blurry to them, and they weren't correcting anything. They were creating more problems.
I know, Judy, I appreciated Michael with all of the chaos and the demands, because all the clerk's office is doing its regular job while all this was going on. He sort of focused on redundancies, and as he just said, elements that were, more apt to cause a problem than not. So it was an opportunity to have a practical look at a process as we were, pivoting and trying to figure out what made the most sense with trying to distance folks.
As a voter, I never quite understood why we needed the second desk. So I was interested when I saw that was becoming voluntary. Dylan, any comments on the second desk?
Get rid of it.
Get rid of it, okay. What about early counting of votes? Which, all of us watched television after the presidential election, and we saw what was going on in the states where they couldn't count votes early. And I know I was thankful here that we were able to. And so that's, views on that I think might be useful. Comments, anybody?
It certainly made the process operate smoother. It freed me up on election day to deal with the things on election day that I needed to deal with. If I was there at a central tabulation center, because it's new, I like to make sure the people there know what they were doing, so it would tie me up for a good percentage of the day. And again, that first one, we were there till after midnight trying to get these ballots through. So being able to open them ahead of time, we were storing those ballots in envelopes in our office. So now we were just storing the envelopes outside the envelopes, or the ballots outside the envelopes in my office with the high-speed tabulator storing the information, which we were sealing in a vault. So it's we already had to secure all this thing. It just made it run a little bit smoother, being allowed to do that. Now that's not without controversy, and I don't think we see that moving forward, being able to pre-tabulate votes, because again, we have registration up till, they changed it from 20 days to 10 days, but if somebody passed away within, and we've already opened their ballot, what do you do? So I think there's some
I think-
controversy about that. And what the rule was is that if the vote was cast, then that was counted regardless of whether the person passed away or not. So
I know there's a bill now that the League of Women Voters is supporting, and I think actually, Dylan, that you've signed out on as a co-sponsor of it. I may be wrong about that, but I think the rule would be that once you cast the ballot, it could be counted regardless of whether there had been a death. I had that situation in my family actually, and I told the poll worker, and I think the ballot was counted, but I don't think it, was going to make any difference. But I did have that situation in my own family one time.
yeah, once it's through the tabulator, there's no retrieving that ballot. So once it's cast, it's cast. So
Yeah,
that's what you're going to give up by having pre-tabulation. If you don't have pre-tabulation, it's all till election day. If somebody passes away, then you wouldn't tabulate the ballot.
I know personally, I would think that it's something that doesn't happen all that often and is pretty unlikely to end up being a decisive factor in an election, although I guess it is possible.
Yeah, my personal view would be that that we would have early tabulation, and I think that just free things up for Michael and the clerks on election day, and makes the process a lot easier. I think with mail-in voting and with kind of the period it takes to get all the ballots to the clerk's office, we as citizens are going to start to have to adjust a bit to being used to getting absolute final results a little later than we're used to, and I think that's fine. I think that's fine, and that's something that we're all just going to have to be a little used to. Everything is instant gratification these days, but when it comes to our democracy and making sure that everyone has their vote counted and everyone has access to the polls, I think we can wait a few extra hours or a day or two to make sure that we absolutely get it right. So I think that expectation needs to continue to be built in to citizens going forward. I think we tried to do that ahead of the past couple elections, but I think that's something that people should expect moving forward.
And Judy, I would agree. I mean, I think when we review the process, these are all important considerations, but what is this saying? We have to think about the people that are actually doing the work and making it reasonable expectations within a percentage of accuracy that's as high as reasonably possible. And I think that certainly is what was done here and what we can continue to do going forward.
What about the use of drop boxes? That certainly was something new. What's everybody's feeling about that?
Of what? I'm sorry.
Drop boxes. Being able to return or I think we had a choice. We could either mail back a ballot or bring it to a drop box. I guess if town hall were open and we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, we could just bring it in. But the drop boxes, I think, were something that were.
That's how I voted. I thought it was terrific. I think that any way we can make the process easier for people, it makes sense to do. I voted at the drop box in front of town hall for at least one election last year, maybe a couple. There was a couple instances of people, at least one instance that I can think of someone tampering a drop box in Boston. So I think, look, that's basically an aberration. But at the same time, I think, we have to be mindful of having like some sort of surveillance or presence to make sure that the drop boxes are secure as possible. But I think that they overall have proven to be really effective at giving people more access. So I'd be supportive of them, but I'd also defer to Michael Palmer for his thoughts.
Oh yeah, people took advantage of the Dropbox we had at Town Hall, and I purposely bought one that was pretty secure, and I feel pretty comfortable with it. It's been cemented into the ground out here in Town Hall, and I feel it's pretty secure. During the presidential election, with the help of the police department, we were able to put a surveillance camera. I'm not sure what they use it for, but they have a trailer with a camera on it on a tower, and they were able to put that up there because there were some rumors that there were some people that wanted to tamper with boxes. So we covered our bases there and had that surveillance camera on top of it. My issue would be having them other places in town that weren't a secure. People are coming and going. It's right in front of Town Hall. It's a relatively secure place. But to have it somewhere else where it may not be a heavily traveled area, I would have some concern with the security of that. And again, we have to ask voters to take some responsibility for themselves, and it means they're skeptical of the mail system. Well, okay, I can understand they may be skeptical of the mail system. Some of their performance over the last year was a little bit to be desired. But we have this box, they can drive to Town Hall and put it in the box. They don't need to drive to the house right next door to them and put it in a box there. We're not that big of a town that it makes it a huge trip to come to Town Hall to use the drop box. So
I have to agree. No, I was so glad to see that box because I had so many people tell me, they couldn't get it in the smaller thing. What if it was, it had to be difficult to sort with bills and whatnot. And it becomes a barrier, to voting otherwise. I know in Plymouth, for example, there were folks there was like this little mail slot and the envelope for the ballot was about 3 times as big as the mail slot. So I got a lot of complaints about how people were lined up, dozens of people trying to get the envelope in. So there are some practical considerations. I thought that Michael's solution about having this, this big, strong, identifiable, secure, monitored box was the model that many others adopted after that. So again, it's a balance of practical solutions, the focus on making it pretty easy and open for folks to vote. And as Michael says, you want to make the process so people can come, put their ballot in, and it seemed to all these things I think should be kept going forward.
I used it, and I liked using it.
Just one quick story before we had
using it.
One quick story before we had the mailbox out in front, the big one. We had the one on the side of the building that's basically used for it's a payment box. It's a very small start. Well, Town Hall is closed. Somebody stuck an American flag in there because we recycle American flags. So the next people couldn't stick their ballots in there. So their ballots were sticking out of the envelope, and people were calling to complain that we weren't monitoring the box. I mean, you can't control every situation. So I'm glad we went to a bigger box where that wasn't possible to happen. But things like that.
I'm going to mention. Excuse me. Go ahead. Was somebody else going to say something? I'm going to mention something. There is a bill that the League of Women Voters is supporting, and it does include all of these things we've talked about, and it includes 2 provisions that we haven't talked about that would be new. One of them would be making the application for getting early voting ballots permanent, so that you would fill out an application. I think David Vieira is here. David?
Yes, yeah, I'm here. I'm just
Hi, how are you?
good. Just made it back.
Good. I'll tell you, everybody here has been very much in favor of all of these provisions that we have been, been adopted. And I don't know if your view is going to be the same as everybody's or not. If you want, we can sort of back up and go through them. I was bringing up some new things, but we've talked about early mail-in voting. We've talked about early in-person voting. We've talked about changes in the personnel at the polling place. We've talked about not having a second desk. We've just talked about using the drop boxes. So if I can go through them slowly, or you can pick up, but if you'd like to give us your views on some of these, that would be good. And then we can go on to a couple of other issues.
Sure. I don't know if Mike addressed it, but I know that with the extension that we just did for the municipal elections, it was different than the state elections where folks choose to get an application for a mail-in ballot. And I think that's a good process. And it's a little overwhelming to have all of the cities and town clerks to mail out applications, or to use the Secretary of State's office to mail applications to every single registered voter. And we actually found out that a lot of the addresses were bad, so people were getting applications that weren't there, or there was no one registered in the house in some cases. So I like the way that we're doing it now with the municipal election, where folks say, hey, I can't make it, or I'm not comfortable making it to the election, and I would like to have a ballot sent to me. And so they get the application, they send it to the clerk's office, and the clerk can then process a mail-in ballot. And so I am in favor of that. I think that is also shows initiative to some extent, because one of the things we know with municipal elections, our turnout is always low. Well, if you imagined if everyone got the application and said, okay, I'll just vote in the town election, and has no idea the difference between a selectman and a city councilor, and doesn't know who the candidates are, they need to probably do a little more digging and education like the league does to voters, to be active participants in that election. And so this way, they're showing that initiative by requesting the ballot. And so I would be in favor of continuing to do that.
Could I have some comments from Sue or Dylan or Michael?
Sure.
Or
My view is a little bit different. I think that, there are cost considerations. I'd like to, we've talked with Michael about really trying to streamline and get rid of duplicative efforts. I think that, if, it's an opportunity when you get a ballot to say, oh, wow, it's almost election day. I've been busy with my family or taking care of my maybe an elderly person, or maybe folks are, whatever they, their distraction might be. And it's right there. They can do their research most everyone, especially during COVID and hybrid learning or library availability, has an opportunity to look up candidates. And it's not done, where there's little time to do it. There's enough advance time to look it up and, make your choice. And I think that's really what democracy is all about. So that would be my pivot from a little bit of what David had said.
I would just add, I think democracy is also about responsibility. And when I work with the students in the Scouts, when we do their citizenship badge, we talk about the difference between an obligation and a duty. And voting is a duty in a democracy. And so therefore, having that sense of responsibility and doing your duty to learn about the candidates, request the ballot if you can't go. One of the things I'm concerned about, if everyone just stayed home, right? We lose the American tradition of election day, of a day when folks come out and maybe you take some time off work, or during your lunch break, you go and you hold a sign. And folks come together and they talk about things in the community, and you vote. And then at night you go to a local watering hole, right, to watch the election results come in and to celebrate, or sometimes not celebrate. I've had some of those non-celebration nights myself. But if we just completely said, just stay home, get the ballots over there, everybody can vote from home, we lose that tradition. That I think that we can find some common ground to make it so that everyone has access. That is so important, that everyone has access. But I don't want to give up the American tradition of election day.
Any other comments?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I was pretty clear about my position earlier, but, I absolutely support universal mail-in voting if that's how people choose to vote. If people want to go vote on the day itself. And a lot of people still do that because as to David's point, they like that experience. They like going and voting on the day. That I also very much am supportive of early voting for people who can't vote on the day or they're working. And so it opens up the weekends for them to be able to go cast a ballot. And so I think having that built-in flexibility is also important to allow people, especially those who, we see that extended voting and mail-in voting provides greater access to especially vulnerable people, especially poorer people, people who are, working several jobs. People who have to take care of their kids and deal with childcare and the like. So expanding access, I think, is really important. The data that we've seen on mail-in voting versus going to the polls voting, people who vote by mail actually fill out the down ballot races at a higher rate than people who vote in person, suggesting that, to Sue's point, they actually take the time to say, oh, I don't even know what the planning board is. Let me do some research. Let me Google this person. Let me, figure out what it is. Let me learn about it. So I think it really strengthens democracy in a lot of ways, having that extra time for people to ruminate about their decision and learn more through that process to figure out what all of these down ballot offices are. So yeah, I know I'm kind of repeating what I said earlier, but that's still my view. Yeah.
I'm going to throw something else out because this is a League of Women Voters program, and the League of Women Voters is supporting a bill that is now before the legislature. And one of the provisions in it would do the early mail-in voting, but would send ballots out to everyone, I believe, as was done this time, but you would have the option of asking that you always get a ballot. So that way you would alleviate the problem every year of having the mailing back and forth. So someone could get an application for a mail-in ballot and say, yes, I always want it this way. And those people then would not get the application for the ballot, they just get the ballot. What's your feeling on that?
I'm for it. I know we're running over, so I'll keep it short.
No, we're doing okay. We have a little bit more.
I'll weigh on that a little bit. We do have permanent absentee balloting now, but every year they have to apply for it. My issue would be if somebody moves to Alaska and doesn't tell me they moved to Alaska, we'd be mailing them a ballot. They get it in Alaska and they're registered to vote in Alaska. They never told us. So we have to maintain the voting list. And if we're just every year sending these, well, I guess let's not confuse the point here. It's not ballots we're sending them applications.
You wouldn't have to send out the application every year, but you would end up automatically sending a ballot if somebody had said, I just want a ballot all of the time.
So let's not confuse us. There's an application we could mail out every year, and there's a ballot we could mail out every year. Right now, we're just doing applications. But the issue is when people don't do what they're supposed to do and tell us they're moved, and when states don't communicate to each other and say this person registered in the state of Texas, please remove them from the voting list in Massachusetts, then that's when it causes issues, because now we're going to send a ballot to Texas to that person that's moved. So that's my only issue with that, is that it's not 100% accurate, our voting list, because of that. It takes 4 years or a 2-year federal cycle to remove somebody that hasn't had activity. So.
Okay. Dylan, did you have a comment or? Okay, I think what we're going to do, I am going to find out whether we have gotten any questions from anybody in the audience. And If we have, we're going to do those. And if we haven't, then I'll just give everybody a little bit of time to tell us what they think's coming up in the legislature and what's important to them. So, Mary, are you there? There you are. Have we gotten any questions? You're muted.
Okay, so sorry. No, we did get one question. It's not germane to the meeting, but we don't really have anything to ask.
Okay, is it something you think people would be interested in?
Well,
Ask anyone?
it could be. It's about a change to the open meeting law. Would you like me to ask it?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. The question for the panel is, will temporary changes to the open meeting law to allow remote attendance via Zoom for board meetings and committee meetings continue after the COVID emergency is over?
I think it's a very good question because right now the authorizations not only for the boards and committee meetings, but the one for representative town meetings to be able to meet virtually expires, I believe it's 45 days after the end of the state of emergency. So as we get closer to the end of the state of the emergency, I think we'll have more discussions about that as to what could we continue on, what should we continue on, should we make a hybrid available so that if someone can't be there, that they could Zoom in. We do allow simultaneous telephonic communications right now under the existing law. So we did that before COVID, but you have to have a continuous connection to the meeting. You have to be able to be part of the deliberation if you're a member. So I think it's an interesting thing for us to explore, and I'm sure we are going to have those conversations as we round out the declaration.
Okay, there's a second part of the question, and it is about hybrid meetings and whether the provisions for the public to attend remotely would be continued post-COVID.
Any comments?
Well,
I'll just say that I think that David's right in terms of all of these things being good areas of conversation. I'm in favor of technology elements that will allow as many people to participate as possible. We have a seasonal community here, and a lot of times when they're, just as a Board of Selectmen member, there, would often be hearings where we would have to continue things because of absences and sometimes, so that might be a part of the conversation that we should continue going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with Sue and David. I think, I think we've learned a lot about communication through this pandemic. We've learned a lot of kind of new modes of communication can make life for a lot of people a whole lot easier. So I do think I think one, we're gonna have to take like a really close look at this and see what is appropriate for which types of entities and what isn't. For a local kind of small board, I think it could make a lot of sense to allow this to extend permanently and allow that public access to extend. But for other entities that are kind of more deliberative bodies, I would be hesitant to permanently extend it. There is a lot, I'm just thinking about the legislature, right? As a prime example of that. We've been remote for a year now, and you lose so much being remote. You lose so much in the interactions that you have with your colleagues. You lose a ton in the conversations you have about moving bills forward and the building. You lose a lot from those, just that relationship building with your fellow workers. And that relationship building helps get things moving and helps get things done and passed and turned into real legislation. So, yes, I agree with this in probably most instances, but then there are a number of them where I do think that there's just so much merit to being in person, especially with for deliberative bodies, that I think there's so much more value added for those interpersonal communications.
And if I could just piggyback on that and add, so I'm a little late here today to the party because I was one of 8 people in the House that had to be there to monitor remote sessions. So we have 160 members in the House, and 8 of us are assigned to 20 members where we monitor their communications back and forth to the chamber, as well as their votes. They cast them over the phone, we attest it and go in there. So in the course of that debate, the 8 of us that are monitors have no bandwidth to go, and we can't go and look at an amendment, go talk to someone. At least members at home can text each other or email each other in real time about what's going on. We're locked in to do that. And so that sort of puts us out of that deliberative process unless we choose to find a deputy monitor. And then even that, we have to sign up by 10 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I don't know what I want to say until the middle of the debate, right? And so we lose that free flow of debate where you just get up and speak. Well, you can if you didn't sign up at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so we've made it work so far, and it's worked out well for us to complete the necessities. But we do need to get back as soon as we can to that deliberative process. And as Dylan said, that relationship building. There's a whole class of freshman legislators that I've never met. I saw them walk in, raise their right hand. The governor swore them in. They left the chamber. I haven't met them since. And unfortunately, that's the way it is.
I can attest to that because David was in my office on my first day with a welcome and an offer of collaboration on something. So,
because they let me in the building, I was considered essential.
Okay, I think what we're going to do, we have about 15 minutes left. We promised to try to shoot for ending at about 8:30. So I'm going to ask each of our 3 legislators, give each of you about 5 minutes and just talk about, what you would like to see going on in the legislature. Maybe you'll even get to see each other in the legislature at some point before too long. Bills you're interested in, and any subject. So, Sue, why don't we start with you?
I appreciate it, Judy. This has really been a great forum, and I'm glad David kind of screeched in at the end. I've got a well-rounded group of bills filed, but the one that I want to talk about tonight is a universal child care bill. It's it's House 1960 with Reps Gordon and Madaro, and it's Senate 1307. And my partner in the Senate is Senator Lewis, who is also on the Joint Committee on Education. The bill is called the Common Start Bill. There's a website that gives a lot of detail about it. It's commonstartma.org. And it does really some of the things, sort of as an analogy, just like universal health care. And it's something that in climbing out of COVID and getting our parents, particularly women, back to work, we're really going to need. There are a lot of child care centers that have actually closed. They're like many small businesses. And this not only is a boost to the economy, but even more importantly, really focus on early, early 0 to 5 ages for children. It proposes that from 0 to 5, there would be subsidized childcare, and from 5 to 12, subsidized after school care, and then for special needs kids up to 15. This is something that is contemplated to have a pretty, sort of well thought out 5-year rollout. It also focuses on the actual child care providers. These are primarily women in the field, and it provides an element of funding for owners to actually address the real cost of educating children, and for the employees, the folks that are the child care workers, it has an element of allowing a focus on increasing your licensure or your education. It really, for families below 50% of statewide median income, they would have an option for free. And then for families with higher incomes, they would pay no more than 7%. And any young family right now who's trying to afford health childcare will know that it costs about the same as a first year at UMass Amherst. And so we've got Rep. Catherine Clark, lots of, Elizabeth is looking at it. There are a lot of plans to really think about how do women not lose their place in the economy? How do women not lose the strides they've made as professionals? And just not just women, just looking at the family itself. Right now, coming out of COVID, we've got to pivot to new jobs, a lot of folks who are unemployed. And this is the point in time that we need to look at this issue. So that's what I wanted to use my time tonight for. I appreciate it, Judy. It's been terrific fun. I'll listen to David and Dylan, of course, as well. But take a look at it and let me know what you think about universal child care bill. I'm anxious to hear what you think. And Sandy Feynman Silver knows a lot about it as well.
Let me just say that Sandy Feynman Silver has been in touch with the league, and the league has been in touch with me because we're the legislative committee, and that's on my radar screen after this program is over. So sometime next week, I'm expecting that our committee will. I've printed out quite a bit of information about it. At some point, I thought I probably would get in touch with you about it, but I was on the Zoom session. But 2 days.
Waved.
Yes,
That's
yes,
right.
we waved to each other. So the legislative committee is going to be looking at it, and I have the name of the person in the league who is working on what bills they're going to be supporting. So my expectation is that we'll make a decision as a committee. Possibly it'll be coming from the Falmouth. It'll either come from our legislative committee or from the Falmouth League, and we'll be writing something to the state league about it. So my expectation is that we would be supporting it, but I can't tell you definitely we will because we haven't made that decision yet.
Okay. We're available for any questions, and thanks so much for the league's interest. It's always huge to have that focus. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll probably be in touch with you about it. David, what would you like to talk about for a little bit?
Actually, it's interesting because I want to lead with the same topic, but in a different vein on early education and care. In the last budget that we passed, we created an Early Education and Care Economic Review Commission, similar to an Early Education and Care Learning Commission that we had in 2013, of which I served as a member, and I was just appointed to this commission. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at how do we expand access, and if it's universal access, and at what age and how far, reducing wait lists, and investing in the workforce. We have a 33% turnover in early education and care workers every year. And that's not good. It's not good for the profession. It's not good for the employees. And it's not good for the children who have built relationships with those providers. And then all of a sudden they have to rebuild a new relationship. It's nice to have some stability, not only in the workforce, but in the relationships between the young people and their care providers. So we haven't convened yet. We're waiting for the last few appointments to the commission from the provider networks, but we will begin the work in earnest. And then we will look at our recommendations in light of the Common Start Coalition, who has members on this commission as well, by the way. And then we will make recommendations and legislative recommendations to the House and the Senate. Another one that was actually talked about on the radio on my drive home on Veterans Radio is a resolve that I had got passed unanimously in the House in the last session, and that is House Docket 2313, a resolve to create a Deborah Sampson Memorial Commission. Deborah Sampson, as many of you probably know, is the woman who fought in the Revolutionary War disguised as Robert Shurtleff. And she actually was discovered after contracting a disease from an epidemic in Philadelphia by a physician who then took her to his home with his wife and nursed her to care and wrote a letter saying even though she illegally joined the military, that she should receive a pension. And the General Court of the Commonwealth issued the first pension to a female veteran before women were even allowed in the military. And as you might know as well, she's also the state heroine in Massachusetts. And we have no presence of her on Beacon Hill. And so I started working with the Women Veterans Network last year and the Secretary of Veterans Services and the Adjutant General of the Commonwealth. And we all came together, put this together, working with my Democratic colleague who was the chair of the Veterans Committee, Representative Linda Dean Campbell, who is a veteran herself. She and I, again, are the bipartisan lead sponsors, and we are looking forward to bringing that not only for Deborah Sampson's history, but really, as I said on my floor speech, that this memorial will be a focal point to tell the history of women veterans and the sacrifice of women all the way back to the Revolutionary War. And then the last priority as the ranking member of the bonding committee is to continue to work on managed debt and managed bonding for the state. I've been working on the new courthouse in Barnstable County, as well as new buildings out, new laboratory space at Mass Maritime Academy, and sewer infrastructure for our communities, all important priorities which need bonding. And as the ranking member of the bonding committee, I can work on that. And the last thing I want to mention briefly, if folks that are listening aren't familiar with the new feature that we created last year on the state website called My Legislature, I urge you to go on to malegislature.gov and click My Legislature, where you can sign up to have a little account and a profile, and you can actually put the bill numbers in that you want to follow. And as those bills move along the process and as a hearing is posted, you'll get a direct notification, a direct email, so you can be right up front. You can issue testimony. If we're back in session where you can come into the building, you can come to Boston. But more and more people I talk to have never heard of My Legislature, and this is the third year. So I would hope folks, particularly league members, would register to do that. And I just want to say that I still have my League of Women Voter coffee mug that I got the first time we did this forum with Representative Madden, and at the time, Senator Terry Murray. So thanks for keeping up the tradition, even though it's in a new format, and look forward to working with you in the new session.
Thank you very, very much. We're glad that you did get here. We understand why you were late. What was this My Legislature? This sounds very interesting to me because I am following bills because of the legislative committee. So what was it, My Legislature, and then?
Yeah, so you go to the state website, which is MA for Massachusetts, malegislature.gov. And then one of your menu options on the homepage is My Legislature, and then it will prompt you to create your account.
Okay, I suspect I will be doing that. You know some of the bills that I've been following. I'll probably be in touch with you about those after we finish with this. This has been on my mind. So thank you very, very much. That was an interesting list of things, and especially it was a very interesting story about the first woman who got a pension from the
She
government.
also ended up getting a federal pension, but she died before she collected it, and the U.S. Congress willed it to her husband.
Oh, okay. That sounds a little bit.
Mr. Gannett.
But that's a little bit like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when one of the big cases that she brought to the Supreme Court when she was trying to, prove that women should be getting equal treatment, was where the woman was trying to get something for her husband. It was, and she wasn't allowed because the husband could have gotten it for the wife. So very much like that. Very good story. Dylan.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks again for putting the forum together. I will note that I have not received a League of Women Voters coffee mug, so what gives, I guess.
I didn't know that they existed, frankly, so it's new for me too.
That's all right, yeah. But look, in all seriousness, and David's just rubbing it in right now as he's taking sips from it. This session I was appointed to a number of committees, and was appointed as vice chair of the committee on tourism, arts, and culture. This is a sector of our economy that is so important to our district, so important to the region of the Cape and Islands, and it's one that has been the hardest hit from this epidemic. And so working with my colleagues on the committee to form a really comprehensive response to this, to make sure that our small businesses get the support that they need, to make sure that our arts and tourism culture is back and thriving and getting the support that they need, is going to be one of my main focuses this session. And also, I serve on the Committee of Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, and the Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change. I represent more coastline than any district, maybe on the East Coast, certainly Massachusetts. And so this is an issue that is incredibly important for us. Just today, we passed the biggest climate bill in Massachusetts history, and putting us on a roadmap to net zero by 2050, expanding offshore wind energy, expanding energy efficiency around products, codifying for the first time environmental justice into Massachusetts law. A lot of really amazing things. We need to build on that. And so I filed a number of environmental bills, a number of energy bills, one of which is the Environmental League of Massachusetts priority energy bill this session, which would expand deep water offshore wind, again, 12 miles south of the vineyard. This would, expand offshore wind. This would codify workers' rights provisions in this to make sure that, yes, we're building a clean energy future, but we're also making sure that the people working in this have living wages, have really good paying jobs with good benefits, so that it lifts up everyone. And we also have some language in there about making sure that communities of color and environmental justice communities benefit from this new energy revolution that we're undergoing. And look, we have an opportunity here for Massachusetts to be the nation leader on this. We are already leading the nation. We need to really cement that, and this piece of legislation would help us get there. Climate change is an existential threat, but it's on a longer term horizon. One massive existential threat facing us right now is the lack of affordability for the Cape and Islands, and the lack of housing access for so many people here. Median home prices are absolutely through the roof. They're the highest they've ever been statewide. And here in Falmouth, they are much higher than the median. They're about $200,000, depending on which part of town you're in. They're around they can be up to $200,000 more than the median. And on the islands that I represent, it's more than double that in a lot of places. And the pandemic has exacerbated this problem. So I'm proposing putting a really small 1% to 2% fee on multi-million-dollar home sales. So the first $1 million would be exempt. So ultra luxury multi-million-dollar homes would, the people buying them would have to pay a tiny percentage fee above the $1 million they're already paying. That's exempt, and that would go towards a local housing bank and the local community that can be administered to support workforce housing, and support housing not just for 80% AMI, but up to 200% AMI, so that working professionals as well can get the housing that they need. So that's another piece. Look, I think at the end of the day, Sue, David, myself, we are all working to make sure that our COVID response is really robust, making sure that we are getting, we're holding the administration to account in some instances, and working with them collaboratively and others to make sure we get as many shots administered to as many people, and that we are hopefully on a path to reopening safely. If anyone has, so many people are struggling right now. If folks need help with unemployment, please, reach out to my office. It's right on my personal email that I check every day, several times a day, is right there on the MA Legislature website. If you're struggling and need that help with getting the financial assistance that you need, reach on out, and our team is happy to assist. So thanks again, Judy. Really great work tonight, and really appreciate all the work that you do and the league does to support voting and civic engagement in the town.
Well, thank you very much. I know Michael's been quiet here. If you want to say goodbye to everybody, you're certainly welcome to do that.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds to plug our annual town election, which is on May 18th this year. You have until a week from Friday to take out nomination papers. There's many positions available as a town meeting member, and there are townwide offices also that are going to be on the ballot. But town meeting members in particular, there's lots of openings, and this is an opportunity with not a lot of time commitment for the citizens of Falmouth to be involved in the government in Falmouth and have a say. And instead of just sitting back and complaining about what we do, they will have input. And as a town meeting member, it's a great opportunity, again, with not a huge time commitment. So I hope you consider coming in and take out nomination papers. It's fairly simple. It needs 10 signatures, and you have until the 26th of March to take those out to be placed on the ballot on May 19th. So I encourage everyone to get involved and be involved in government. And again, I'd like to thank you, Judy, and the League of Women Voters and our legislators who are working hard for the constituents here in Falmouth and representing us in Boston. So thank you all.
I'm glad I asked you, because that was certainly an important plug to get in, and this was a good time to do it. Now it's my time to sign off. So to our viewers, we thank you for tuning in, and we hope that you found the program interesting and that it provided food for thought as we go forward in 2021. And again, thank you to FCTV, to our panelists, to Mary Tamucci, and to two other members of the Legislative Committee who have been here behind the scenes, sort of watching over things, Kerry Walton and Margaret Cooper. And if you know someone who might like to listen to a rebroadcast of this program, tell them to check the FCTV website for other viewing options. So again, I thank all of you for being part of this. Thank the audience for joining us, and I bid you all good night.
Great job, Judy. Thanks all.
Good night. Thanks, guys.
Night.
Bye, guys.